Court shocks white cop when black woman reveals she's a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer. In a packed courtroom hushed by tense anticipation, all eyes darted between a stern-faced white police officer and the poised, elegant black woman he had arrested. Rumors of racial slurs and humiliation tactics had already leaked to the public, and the crowd braced for a dramatic showdown. The officer's smug expression suggested he believed he had the upper hand. Why wouldn't he? He wore the badge, wielded the law, and was used to having judges side with him. Yet, something about the woman's unflinching composure hinted at a secret power. She was no ordinary citizen, and his ignorance was about to cost him dearly. Selena Jordan woke before sunrise, her disciplined schedule unbroken by even the most grueling circumstances. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the dim horizon slowly brighten. Even at that early hour, the Florida humidity was thick and unforgiving. Selena had grown accustomed to such extremes in weather, as her career often placed her in environments far more unwelcoming than a simple hot day in Jacksonville. Yet, she stood there breathing deeply, feeling the interplay of tension and calm coursing through her body. At 35, Selena was a decorated member of the U.S. Air Force, holding a position in intelligence that had taken her around the world. But when people saw her outside the confines of the Air Force, they rarely guessed her occupation. To the casual observer, she was a gracious, confident black woman who wore her hair in neat, pinned braids, spoke in a measured, almost musical tone, and walked with the kind of purposeful stride that hinted at a disciplined mind. What no one saw at first glance were the trials she had faced, trials that would have broken those less resolute. Today was her day off, a rare sliver of time she treasured between missions and training sessions at Langley Air Force Base. She had driven down to Jacksonville to visit her ailing Aunt Rosalie, who had practically raised her after Selena's parents passed away in a tragic car accident when she was just a teenager. Aunt Rosalie lived in a modest one-story bungalow, a place Selena always found comforting in its familiarity, creaking floorboards, slightly peeling paint, and the sweet scent of honeysuckle from the front yard. That morning, Selena planned a quick run to a local bakery to pick up Aunt Rosalie's favorite pastries. She slipped on a pair of comfortable jeans and a white t-shirt, tying her athletic shoes tightly. She glanced in the mirror, noticing the small silver Air Force pin she often wore as a quiet point of pride. She hesitated, wondering if wearing that pin might draw unwanted attention, especially in a part of the country where casual prejudice still sometimes lurked. But her heart whispered that she should wear it anyway. It was part of who she was, and she had learned to own that proudly. As Selena drove through the subdued streets in her navy blue SUV, the sky shifting to pinks and yellows with the rising sun, she found herself reflecting on her latest assignment. Stationed at Langley, she had been working on projects involving advanced surveillance drones, highly classified and intricately technical. The long nights poring over data were punishing, but she thrived on the challenge. She had come a long way from the shy, orphan teenager whose only dream was to honor her parents' memory by serving her country. Little did Selena know the peace that morning offered would soon be shattered by an encounter that would test her resilience and dignity in ways no battlefield ever had. The aroma of fresh bread enveloped Selena the moment she entered Greta's bakery. Aunt Rosalie's favorite pastry, an old-fashioned glazed donut, practically called her name. Selena took her time picking out an assortment, from apple fritters to lemon-filled delights, smiling politely at the elderly woman behind her in line who complimented her lovely pin. Selena simply nodded and said, "Thank you." Moments like that reminded her there was still kindness in the world. Stepping out of the bakery, she was met with a blinding flash of sunlight. Balancing the pastry box, she walked toward her SUV. Suddenly, a shrill voice hollered from across the parking lot, ordering her to stop. She turned to see a police officer, white, mid-40s, stocky build, and a scowl etched on his face. His name tag read Officer Hartman. The moment their eyes met, Selena felt a subtle, yet familiar dread unravel within her. "Ma'am," Officer Hartman barked, "you can't park there. This lot is for patrons only." His tone was harsh, brimming with suspicion, as if he had already convicted her in his mind of some wrongdoing. Selena approached him calmly, opening the pastry box slightly to show the baked goods. "Officer, I just picked these up inside. I am a customer," she said quietly, gesturing back to the bakery's entrance. He stared at the pastries, then at her Air Force pin, and a flicker of something, irritation, contempt, or both, passed through his eyes. License and registration, he demanded, with no greeting, no explanation. Selina noticed his right hand hovering near his holster, the weight of potential violence in the air. Confused but still trying to maintain her composure, she asked politely, "Did I do something wrong, sir? You want to cause trouble, or do you want to comply?" He shot back, voice bristling with hostility. Selina felt the tension in her stomach tighten. She had never been one to escalate situations, especially not with law enforcement. Methodically, she placed the pastry box on the hood of her SUV and handed over her license and registration as requested. Officer Hartman snatched them from her hand, glancing quickly at her name and the address. His lips curled in a small sneer. "What's this pin on your shirt? You think you're special because you were in the Air Force or something?" His question was laced with condescension, pronouncing Air Force with a sarcastic inflection that stung. Selina steadied herself. "I'm currently serving, officer." She tried to keep her voice level, though inside, alarm bells were ringing. Something about his attitude suggested that no matter what she said, he had already formed his opinion. "Military, huh?" he said, eyeing her skeptically. "Well, you're in my jurisdiction now, and I don't appreciate attitudes from people who think they're above the law." Selina was taken aback. She hadn't given him any attitude. She had simply stated a fact. But she recognized the look in his eyes, a look she had encountered before in certain corners of society where uniform or rank did little to shield her from prejudice. She had trained to handle high-pressure environments, yet something about this man's unwarranted hostility rattled her deeply. Officer Hartman began a litany of criticisms about her vehicle, claiming her brake lights were tinted too dark and that her license plate was partially obstructed by a frame. Selina knew these were minor issues at best, certainly not something worthy of the aggression he displayed. Her heart began to beat louder as she realized that he was looking for any possible reason to escalate. When another customer emerged from the bakery, Hartman shot the newcomer a glare that seemed designed to keep them at a distance. Selina noticed how the man quickly averted his eyes and scurried to his car, not wanting to get involved. It was as if the whole street had emptied, leaving only her and this officer locked in an unsettling confrontation. Before Selina could fully comprehend the progression, Officer Hartman declared, "Turn around. Hands behind your back. I'm placing you under arrest." "For what?" Selina asked, alarm rising in her voice. "Resisting investigation and obstructing an officer," he snapped, stepping forward. Selina's mind raced. This was surreal. She had done nothing wrong. She had a valid license, valid registration, and had just bought pastries. She could see the vein on his temple pulsing, as though any contradiction from her would fuel his fury. The realization that he was itching to arrest her for no legitimate reason struck her with chilling clarity. Still, she complied, turning around and offering no resistance. She understood the stakes. Resisting could lead to violence. As he cuffed her wrists with a tightness that felt more punitive than standard procedure, Selina bit her lip against the pain. She had faced down far worse threats in her line of work, but none of those moments compared to the humiliation she felt now, standing in a public parking lot, not a single soul stepping in to ask what was happening. The pastries she had so carefully chosen for Aunt Rosalie tumbled off the SUV's hood and onto the asphalt, the box flipping open and scattering its contents. She had no chance to retrieve them as Officer Hartman forcibly led her to the squad car. In the reflection of the bakery's glass door, Selina saw her own face etched with shock and helplessness. But behind her eyes burned a silent resolve, a promise to herself that she would stand up for her rights no matter what happened next. The ride to the station felt excruciatingly long. Officer Hartman said nothing, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the road. The silence crackled with unspoken tension. Selina couldn't decide if she should speak up or stay quiet. Every instinct from her military training told her to keep calm, observe, and gather information. She noticed the way his grip tightened on the steering wheel whenever she moved slightly in the back seat, as if anticipating she might lash out. But Selina had no intention of acting recklessly. Her mind was already planning her next steps, how she would explain this injustice to a judge or to whomever had the sense to listen. Once at the station, she was processed with cold deficiency. They took her fingerprints, her mug shot, an experience that felt surreal. She had held a top-level security clearance, led intelligence analysis teams in hostile territories, and here she was being treated like a common criminal. A few of the officers in the station corridor gave her quizzical looks, likely because she was dressed casually but carried herself with a confidence that did not match her predicament. And then there was that Air Force pin, which she still wore as if it were a fragile talisman of a life that now felt very far away. Officer Hartman instructed another officer to place her in a holding cell, telling the man, "She thinks she's something special, so we'll let her cool off." Selena said nothing, though her heart pounded. She wondered what exactly he had written in his report, some twisted version of the morning's events where she was supposedly obstructing or resisting. The holding cell was a drab, lifeless room with a narrow bench. A flickering fluorescent bulb overhead cast a harsh glow, making the dull gray walls seem even more oppressive. Selena took a seat, closed her eyes, and focused on her breathing. She recalled the mental resilience exercises she'd been taught in the Air Force, techniques to maintain composure under extreme stress. She reminded herself to be patient. Once she got her phone call, she would ring her commanding officer or even a lawyer friend. Time dragged in the holding cell. Hours seemed to pass, though it might have only been minutes. Finally, a female officer came by to check on her. The woman couldn't hide her curiosity. "Hey, I'm Officer Ana Benitez. You okay?" she asked gently, as if aware that Selena might be the victim of an overzealous arrest. "I'm fine," Selena replied. "May I please make a phone call?" Officer Benitez looked uncertain, then nodded. "Let me see what I can do." She left and returned a short while later, indicating that Selena could use the station's phone. But to Selena's dismay, Officer Hartman appeared almost out of nowhere, intercepting them. "What are you doing?" Hartman asked Benitez, voice cold. "She gets a phone call. That's standard," Officer Benitez said with a shrug. "No reason to hold her without letting her call someone." Hartman's lips thinned, and he glanced at Selena. The hatred and arrogance in his gaze made her stomach churn. "Fine," he relented through gritted teeth, "but make it quick." Selena picked up the phone, dialing the number of her cousin Cameron, a lawyer in Miami. He had always told her, "If you ever find yourself in legal trouble, call me first, no matter what." She prayed he would answer. After 3 rings, Cameron picked up, sounding slightly out of breath. Selena quickly explained the situation. Arrested outside a bakery, accused of obstructing an officer. Cameron listened in stunned silence, then told her to give him the details of the precinct. "I'll make calls. Just hold tight," he said, voice laced with urgency. Hanging up, Selena felt a slight tremor in her hands. She tried to steady herself. Having someone who believed her side of the story felt like a lifeline in this sea of chaos. But before she was escorted back to the holding cell, Officer Hartman stepped forward. "Who did you call?" he demanded. "My attorney," Selena said simply. He snorted. "Don't think you're getting out of this that easily." Then he leaned closer, voice pitched low so that Benitez wouldn't hear, and hissed, "You want to flash that military badge of yours around here thinking it gives you a free pass? Not in my station." Selena stared back, refusing to cower. In the back of her mind, a simmering rage built. She had faced misogyny and racism before, but never so blatant, never so brazen. Yet she knew that anger wouldn't solve anything in the moment. She remembered her training. Remain calm, gather intel, survive, then fight for justice the right way. By late afternoon, Selena was released on bail after her cousin Cameron worked his legal magic. The charges that Officer Hartman had cited were tenuous at best: obstruction of justice and resisting arrest without violence. Her court date was set for the following week. As she stepped out of the station into the hot Florida sun, she felt the weight of humiliation pressing on her chest. The adrenaline that had kept her calm was now draining, leaving her with trembling hands and a swirling mix of fear, anger, and confusion. She found her SUV still parked by the bakery, now ticketed for unauthorized parking. The pastry box lay crumpled on the ground, flies buzzing around the ruined treats. A wave of sadness washed over Selena. The scene felt symbolic, something sweet and comforting now destroyed, left in disarray for all to see. After brushing away tears she hadn't realized were forming, Selena picked up the box and disposed of it in a nearby trash can. Her wrists still bore the red marks from the handcuffs. A sense of disbelief lingered. Had this really happened to her? She was a decorated Air Force intelligence officer, used to being treated with respect. But none of that mattered to Officer Hartman, who saw only her skin color and an imagined threat. Driving back to Aunt Rosalie's, Selena grappled with how to explain the events of the day. Aunt Rosalie had always warned her about the realities of racism, telling her, "Your uniform won't always protect you in the civilian world." Yet Selena had held on to the belief that her service might at least earn her some benefit of the doubt. She realized now how naive that had been. Racism could barrel through any barrier, ignoring titles, ranks, or achievements. When she arrived, Aunt Rosalie was sitting in her favorite armchair, flipping through a tattered photo album filled with pictures of Selena's parents. The older woman's eyes lit up when she saw Selena, but the joy quickly turned to worry upon noticing her niece's disheveled appearance and subdued demeanor. Selena explained everything, from the moment Officer Hartman stopped her to the humiliating few hours in the holding cell. Tears ran down Aunt Rosalie's face, not just for Selena's ordeal, but for the countless times in her own life she had faced injustice without recourse. "We'll get through this," Aunt Rosalie said, voice quivering yet resolute. "I know it's not the first time you've dealt with something like this, but I pray it's the last." Selena forced a small smile, then pulled her aunt into a tight embrace. She didn't want her aunt to see how shaken she really was, but she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. That evening, Selena and Cameron had a long phone conversation about the upcoming court date. The state was pressing charges based on Hartman's report, which portrayed Selena as aggressive and non-compliant. Cameron assured her they could challenge these claims in court, especially with the bakery's CCTV footage as evidence, footage that presumably would show Selena's calm demeanor during the exchange. Still, the trial would be an emotional ordeal, a public stage for the officer's lies and her fight for justice. Despite the burden of the impending legal battle, Selena clung to one truth. She was innocent, and the facts would bear that out in court. As she lay down that night, the echo of the handcuffs biting into her skin replayed in her mind like a haunting refrain. She vowed to stand her ground, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been profiled, harassed, or demeaned solely because of how they looked. In the days leading up to the trial, Selena split her time between consulting with Cameron, caring for her aunt, and enduring restless nights. Word of her arrest spread through some local circles. A few acquaintances tried to reach out, offering superficial sympathy or idle curiosity. Selena kept her circle tight, trusting only those closest to her. Her commanding officer at Langley Air Force Base, Colonel Roger Donovan, was a seasoned leader with a deep respect for all his subordinates. When Selena informed him about the situation, he responded with concern. "Selena, you have our full support," he said. "If necessary, we'll send someone to testify to your character, or we can at least confirm your rank and station. Let me know how we can help." For Selena, the most pressing matter was to secure the video footage from Greta's bakery. Cameron made several calls, and after some negotiations, the bakery's management agreed to provide a copy for the legal defense. Selena and Cameron watched it together. The grainy black and white footage showed her calmly exiting the bakery, bag of pastries in hand. Officer Hartman approached aggressively, pointing toward her car. Though the video had no audio, it clearly depicted Selena's cooperative demeanor, and not once did she appear to resist physically or even gesture in a threatening way. "That's our ace," Cameron said. "He's going to have a hard time explaining that to a judge, especially since his report claims you were belligerent and disruptive." Still, Selena felt uneasy. Officer Hartman had that arrogant air of someone who believed he was untouchable. She suspected he had some allies in the department who might back him up, altering reports or corroborating his statements. This was the sort of insidious network that made accountability so difficult. Even with video evidence, justice was never guaranteed. Meanwhile, Officer Hartman seemed to relish the attention. A few local tabloids or lesser-known news sites ran brief stories, sometimes sympathetic to Selena, sometimes painting her as just another potential troublemaker. Hartman's quotes were blunt, describing Selena as defiant and acting as if military status put her above local laws. The stories bristled with a subtext of racial undertones, though not explicitly stated. Determined not to let the negativity overwhelm her, Selena threw herself into maintaining her physical and mental discipline. Every morning, she woke at dawn to run through Aunt Rosalie's neighborhood. The repetitive rhythm of her shoes hitting the pavement helped clear her mind. She also practiced her Air Force mindfulness drills, focusing on controlled breathing and mental imagery, reminding herself that this too was a battle, one that required strategic calm. On the Sunday before the trial, Selena attended a small church service with her aunt. Though not overtly religious, She found comfort in the sense of community. The pastor, an older man with a warm smile, spoke about endurance and the importance of standing up for truth. Selena let those words wash over her, fortifying her resolve. The evening before she was due in court, Selena stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair into a neat bun. She studied her reflection, noticing the subtle shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights. In a last burst of determination, she pinned her Air Force insignia to her blouse, telling herself, "This is who I am, no matter what that officer says." She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, as though expelling the lingering doubts. Tomorrow would be the day she stood face to face with Officer Hartman again. But this time, she would have her truth and the law on her side. Court day arrived thick with tension. The air in the Jacksonville County Courthouse lobby felt charged, alive with murmurs of friends, family, and curious onlookers. Selena, wearing a professional dark suit, walked in with Cameron by her side. Her posture was upright, and she held her head high, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. She noticed a few reporters in the corner, cameras rolling. She avoided their gazes, not wishing to invite sensationalism. Cameron led her to a private waiting area where they could organize their notes and finalize their strategy. "Just answer truthfully," he told her. "We have the video. We have your spotless record. Stay calm. Don't let him bait you." Finally, the bailiff called her case, State of Florida versus Selena Jordan. Selena and Cameron entered the courtroom. The sudden hush of the gathered crowd pressed in on her ears. She felt a pulse of adrenaline, the same kind she experienced before a critical briefing or a high-stakes mission. This time, though, the enemy was in plain sight. Officer Hartman, seated at the prosecutor's table, wearing his uniform and a smug expression. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Honorable Sarah Morton, had a reputation for fairness but little patience for theatrics. She called the court to order, and the prosecutor, a stiff man with wire-rimmed glasses, began laying out the state's case. He depicted Selena as a hostile individual who refused to cooperate with Officer Hartman's instructions, forcing him to arrest her. He carefully avoided direct mention of her military status, but the implication lingered that she was someone who thought she was above the law. Throughout the prosecutor's opening statement, Selena observed the reactions of the jury, 6 of them, mostly older, a few younger, racially mixed. She couldn't read much from their faces, but she sensed some curiosity, perhaps even sympathy. Cameron had advised her that sometimes in these cases the jury might be more supportive of law enforcement unless the evidence proved egregious misconduct. She hoped the bakery footage would be enough to show how distorted Officer Hartman's claims were. Officer Hartman took the stand next. Selena's stomach tightened as he raised his right hand and vowed to tell the truth. He recounted his version of events. He claimed Selena parked illegally and became confrontational when he tried to issue a citation, using profanity and refusing to provide her documents. He said she had stepped aggressively toward him, prompting him to fear for his safety. Each sentence spilled from his mouth like carefully rehearsed lines. Selena noticed the small touches he added, dramatic phrasing such as, "I feared for my life," and "she was escalating." Her anger simmered. She recalled all too well how it was he who had escalated things from the moment he laid eyes on her. Cameron cross-examined systematically, poking holes in Hartman's story. "Officer, did you attempt to verify if Miss Jordan was indeed a customer at the bakery?" "She wouldn't let me speak," Hartman insisted, a faint twitch at the corner of his mouth betraying his discomfort. Cameron held up a receipt from Greta's Bakery, time-stamped. "This is the receipt for the pastries Miss Jordan purchased. Are you claiming she was trespassing on that property?" Hartman shifted in his seat. She parked outside the designated lines. It was suspicious. Cameron's brow furrowed. Suspicious? To be slightly off the parking lines at 8 in the morning with a box of pastries. Hartman stammered. "It's a high-crime area. We can't be too careful." Cameron nodded. "Understood. Now, you stated that Miss Jordan used profanity. Could you specify the words she used?" The officer's eyes flickered. "I don't recall the exact words, but I know she was very disrespectful. Is there any audio recording from your body camera to confirm that?" Hartman's face hardened. "My camera malfunctioned that day." A low murmur swept through the courtroom, people clearly noting the convenient timing of a malfunction. The judge signaled for silence, her expression betraying a hint of skepticism. Next, it was Selena's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand, her heart fluttering but her voice steady as she took the oath. Cameron guided her through her account of the incident, starting from the moment she exited Greta's bakery. As Selena explained the chain of events, she kept her tone calm and direct, describing Officer Hartman's hostility and her attempts to comply. She explained how he demanded her license and registration, which she provided without argument. She also made sure to mention the subtle racial undertones, though she wasn't sure how far to push that angle in a courtroom setting. She simply explained that she felt targeted, that he sneered at her Air Force pin, and that she believed his hostility was fueled by prejudice. "Did you resist or obstruct him in any way?" Cameron asked. "No," Selena answered. "I complied with every demand because I was genuinely afraid he might hurt me if I didn't." What happened next? She recounted the arrest, the tight handcuffs, and the humiliating transport to the station. Every word reverberated through the silent courtroom. Selena could feel the eyes of the jury on her, some looking disturbed, others resolute in taking in every detail. Finally, Cameron introduced the bakery's CCTV footage. The grainy video played on a small monitor at the front of the courtroom. Although silent, it showed Selena handing over papers, standing calmly, never raising her arms in an aggressive manner. It also showed Officer Hartman stepping into her personal space, wagging a finger in her face. Then came the moment of arrest, Selena turning around, placing her hands behind her back without resistance, her face a mask of surprise. The video ended, and a hush fell. The disparity between Hartman's testimony and what was captured on camera was stark. The prosecutor's expression tightened. Officer Hartman refused to meet anyone's eyes. In that moment, Selena felt a surge of hope. During her testimony, Selena hadn't yet explicitly stated her exact role in the Air Force. She had hinted at her service, but she had not gone into detail. Cameron rose and said, "Miss Jordan, could you please clarify for the court your current occupation and rank?" Selena cleared her throat. "I'm a technical sergeant in the United States Air Force, assigned to intelligence at Langley Air Force Base. My role involves analysis and strategic operations to protect national security." A visible ripple of surprise went through the gallery, and even the judge raised an eyebrow. For many, intelligence conjured images of hush-hush missions and specialized training. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, looking uneasy. Perhaps he had expected a more ordinary occupation from Selena, or perhaps the gravity of her service record made Officer Hartman's allegations even less believable. Cameron continued, "Is it fair to say you've undergone rigorous training in conflict de-escalation, situational awareness, and respectful compliance with law enforcement, due to both your civilian life and your duties in the Air Force?" "Yes, sir," Selena replied, her voice firm. "We're taught to handle ourselves professionally and ethically, to remain calm under pressure, and to respect local authorities." Cameron thanked her and gestured for her to be seated. Selena felt a rush of relief that her full story was now out in the open. It was no longer just her word against an officer's. It was her demonstrated record of service, her discipline, her values. When closing arguments began, Cameron delivered a passionate but precise summary, emphasizing the discrepancies in Hartman's statements, the video evidence, and Selena's exemplary record in the Air Force. The prosecutor tried to spin a narrative of anyone can appear calm on a silent video, and Officer Hartman was just doing his job, but even he seemed half-hearted, as if he sensed the tide was turning. The judge adjourned to consider the evidence, and the tension in the room hit a fever pitch. Selena could almost feel the pulse of every individual in the courtroom, all waiting to see how this story would conclude. When the judge returned, her expression was resolute. She spoke methodically, going over each piece of evidence and testimony. She pointed out the glaring inconsistencies in Officer Hartman's version compared to the video and Selena's calm demeanor. Finally, she announced the verdict. Not guilty on all counts. A wave of relief coursed through Selena, and she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A smattering of applause broke out from the gallery, quickly silenced by the bailiff's stern glare. Cameron gave Selena a triumphant nod, and she whispered, "Thank you." But the judge wasn't finished. She turned her attention to the prosecutor and said, "This court has serious concerns about the conduct of Officer Hartman and the accuracy of his sworn statements. I urge the state attorney's office and the Jacksonville Police Department to review this matter for potential disciplinary action." The words struck like a thunderbolt. Hartman's smug facade cracked, revealing a grimace of disbelief. The tension in the courtroom soared. Selena saw something else flicker across his face. Fear, or perhaps the realization that he was no longer untouchable. Outside, a small crowd had gathered, some supporters, a few local activists, and press. The moment Selena exited, microphones were thrust toward her, cameras flashing. She was still reeling from the emotional roller coaster, but she maintained composure. Cameron politely informed the media that they had no statements at this time. Selena just wanted to get Aunt Rosalie home and savor the relief of justice served. In the days following the judge's decisive verdict of not guilty, a hush seemed to settle over Jacksonville, like the inhaled breath just before a storm's thunderclap. The hush, however, didn't last long. Once word spread that a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer had been wrongfully arrested, local and regional news stations descended like a flock of curious birds, pecking for every morsel of detail. Their coverage ignited debate about race, policing, and accountability, with many people previously indifferent suddenly feeling compelled to take a stance. For Selena, that media firestorm was daunting. She had never craved the spotlight. Her life, both in the civilian world and in the Air Force, was defined by a sense of duty rather than fame. So when reporters persistently reached out for interviews, leaving voicemails and sending messages to her social media accounts, Selena felt torn. On one hand, she wanted to set the record straight and possibly open doors for crucial conversations about systemic bias. On the other hand, she loathed sensationalism, worried that her story would be reduced to a flashy headline and a few provocative sound bites. In the end, she chose to grant one exclusive interview to a major news network. Stepping into their studio under the harsh glare of bright lights, she felt her heart race. The host, a middle-aged woman with a reputation for balanced journalism, offered Selena a sympathetic smile. The cameras rolled, and Selena spoke quietly yet firmly about the events leading up to her arrest and the courtroom victory she never should have had to fight so hard for. Throughout the interview, she emphasized the importance of not painting all police officers with a single brush. "I'm not here to demonize law enforcement," Selena said. "I serve my country, and I understand the responsibility that comes with wearing a uniform. Many officers do their jobs with honor and integrity. But for those who misuse their authority, there need to be systems in place, real checks and balances, to hold them accountable." Her words struck a chord, especially among those who had long felt voiceless in the face of unchecked power. Civil rights groups in Jacksonville began issuing statements, lauding her courage. Some activists reached out directly, inviting her to speak at town halls or to participate in community panels aimed at bridging the gap between law enforcement and citizens of color. Selena appreciated their efforts but felt out of her depth, unsure whether she wanted to become a public figure for a cause that was larger than one case in one courtroom. Meanwhile, back at the Jacksonville Police Department, an internal investigation commenced. The chief of police, under mounting pressure from city council members and the public, announced that Officer Hartman was suspended pending the outcome of a thorough review of his conduct. While some officers rallied around Hartman, others who had quietly watched his methods over the years finally found the courage to speak out. It started with small revelations. Officers coming forward with accounts of times they had been uncomfortable with Hartman's harsh language or overzealous tactics. Some admitted they had kept silent because they feared retaliation or isolation within the force. But Selena's public vindication seemed to break the dam of silence. Anonymous tips surfaced about previous altercations, some dating back several years. A scathing portrait of Hartman's career began to take shape, a trail of complaints, especially from citizens of color, that had been systematically dismissed as unsubstantiated due to lack of tangible evidence. An internal affairs investigator, Detective Monica Suarez, led the probe. She met with a dozen community members who claimed they had encountered Hartman under circumstances that bordered on harassment. One man, shaking with the memory of it, recounted how Hartman had pulled him over for a broken taillight, but ended up pinning him to the hood of his car while repeatedly taunting him about going back to jail. Another story involved a young Latina woman who alleged that Hartman verbally berated her for not speaking English properly when she tried to explain a minor traffic violation. Though these incidents were never formally reported out of fear of escalation or disbelief that anything would be done, people now felt emboldened by Selena's victory and the subsequent attention on Hartman's tactics. Detective Suarez found herself working late nights, piecing together testimonies, old dashcam footage, and departmental logs. She was methodical in her approach, aware that any flaw in her investigation could undermine the credibility of real victims. As she delved deeper, she discovered patterns in Hartman's reports, how he often cited vague justifications like suspected loitering or potential disorderly conduct that led to arrests or citations, typically involving people of color. Some of these individuals had no way to fight the system, so they pled guilty to avoid prolonged legal battles, leaving a paper trail of minor but life-altering charges. The more Suarez uncovered, the more she realized that Selena's case was not an outlier. It was merely the one that was visible enough, dramatic enough, to be undeniable. Jacksonville itself became a crucible of discussion. From radio talk shows to Sunday church sermons, people debated the meaning of this single high-profile court case. Some insisted that Selena's exoneration proved the system could work. Others argued it only showed that justice might be possible if you were already part of a respected institution like the U.S. Air Force, implying that an ordinary black woman in Selena's position could still have ended up incarcerated or worse. Protests, though mostly peaceful, sprang up near the police station. Signs reading "Protect and Serve All" and "End Qualified Immunity" bobbed in the crowd. One evening, a march took place, organized by local activists who believed that Hartman's suspension was a step in the right direction, but not enough to address deeper systemic problems. Selena's name appeared on placards and banners, though she hadn't been involved in organizing these events. She was a symbol now, willing or not, of what could happen when one dares to challenge injustice. That same week, Aunt Rosalie received dozens of phone calls from neighbors, friends, and even acquaintances she barely remembered, all wanting to show support or express their outrage over what had happened to her niece. Aunt Rosalie graciously thanked them, but she worried about the weight of it all on Selena's shoulders. Late at night, Selena and her aunt would sit at the kitchen table, sipping chamomile tea, while Selena tried to process the magnitude of her situation. Sometimes they spoke in hushed, careful tones, unsure whether they were relieved that the truth had come out or distressed by how quickly Selena's life had been thrown into the public arena. While Selena's name swirled in conversations about racial justice and law enforcement reform, Officer Hartman found himself ensnared by the very system he once wielded to intimidate. The local press soon discovered a disturbing piece of footage from 3 years prior, a shaky cell phone video capturing Hartman slamming a teenage boy against a wall for an alleged curfew violation. The boy's mother had pleaded with Hartman to show some understanding. In the video, Hartman's only response was to shout, "Don't talk back to me," as he held the boy's arm twisted behind his back. The case had been closed with no disciplinary action at the time, but in light of new scrutiny, the Jacksonville Police Department reopened it. Public outrage soared. Headlines like "Repeat Offender with a Badge" and "Jacksonville Officer's History of Excessive Force Under Investigation" dominated the local news cycle. Hartman's defenders, initially vocal about standing by one of their own, found it harder to justify his actions. The police union, which had initially denounced Selena's claims as baseless attacks on an upstanding officer, quietly withdrew their public statements in support of Hartman. Hartman himself refused to comment for any news outlets. He lived in a small gated community just outside the city limits, and neighbors reported seeing him pacing in his yard late at night, head down. Eventually, the department could no longer ignore the growing mountain of evidence. They terminated him, citing violation of departmental policies, dishonesty in official reports, and excessive use of force. Rumors circulated that criminal charges might be forthcoming, charges related not only to Selena's arrest, but also to multiple prior incidents that were now under fresh legal examination. The irony was not lost on Selena. The intensity of media coverage about Hartman's downfall overshadowed her own story in many ways. Her exoneration, the harm done to her reputation, and the traumatic nature of being handcuffed and humiliated publicly all seemed to take a back seat to the sensational narrative of a bad cop finally facing justice. She observed the fervor with a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because no other innocent person would hopefully endure Hartman's bigotry. Sadness because she knew countless other officers with similar tendencies might still roam the streets in other precincts, their misdeeds hidden or tolerated by a culture of silence. Well-wishers congratulated Selena for taking him down, but she never felt triumph. One afternoon, as she was folding laundry in the living room while Aunt Rosalie dozed on the couch, Selena realized the exhaustion she felt wasn't just physical. It was a deeper kind of weariness, an emotional toll exacted by a battle she had not chosen. This is what it means to stand up for yourself, she thought. It's never just about you. It's about everyone who can't fight back. Although proud of her own resilience, she wished the world didn't require such battles in the first place. She confided these mixed feelings in Cameron, her cousin and legal counsel who had guided her through the court process. They met for coffee at a quiet cafe where the staff recognized Selena from the news, but gave her respectful space. Over steaming cups of cappuccino, she admitted that she felt guilt, frustration, and relief all at once. Cameron gently reminded her that her case brought long-buried truths to light. Sometimes we change the system by accident, by simply refusing to yield, he said. You didn't set out to be an activist, but your victory has sparked something that goes beyond you. A month later, Selena was back on the base at Langley, reviewing classified drone footage in a secure facility. The beep of the monitors and the hum of the air conditioning provided a strangely comforting backdrop. She was scheduled to ship out on another mission soon, something hush-hush in the Middle East that demanded her expertise. Despite her ordeal in Jacksonville, her career had not been derailed. In fact, the unwavering support from her commanding officers and peers reassured her that she was on the right path. That evening, she visited Colonel Roger Donovan's office to finalize some paperwork. He handed her a sealed envelope. A letter of commendation, he said, smiling. Not just for your service here, but for your courage in standing up for what's right. The Air Force admires your strength, and so do I. Selena felt her throat constrict with emotion. Thank you, sir, she managed. There's more, Donovan added, leaning forward. You're being considered for a leadership role in an expanded intelligence unit. We need someone who can remain calm under fire, someone who knows how to handle adversity, and you've shown that better than anyone. Selena's eyes widened. Sir, I'm honored. Don't thank me yet, Donovan said, a twinkle in his eye. It's still pending, and you'll have to earn it. But you have strong allies here, and we believe in you. Walking out of the office, Selena felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her life wasn't just about surviving injustice. It was about excelling in her chosen field, using her gifts to make a genuine difference for her country. She thought about how close she had come to letting a single rogue cop's prejudice derail her. Yet here she was, stronger than ever. Back in Jacksonville, Aunt Rosalie's health improved enough for her to plan a short trip to visit Selena at Langley. Selena arranged accommodations, wanting her aunt to see her world and understand that she was okay. On the day Aunt Rosalie arrived, Selena gave her a tour of the base, a highlight being a glimpse of the advanced surveillance drone she worked on. Aunt Rosalie looked at Selena with pride shining in her eyes. They say God doesn't put more on us than we can bear, she whispered, clasping Selena's hand. And he sure knows you're one strong woman. Months later, Selena found a steady rhythm again. Early mornings at the gym, intense intelligence briefings during the day, and occasional phone calls to Aunt Rosalie in the evenings. Sometimes she would think back to that parking lot in Jacksonville, how quickly a routine morning turned into a nightmare. She didn't dwell on it with bitterness, but rather saw it as a stark reminder that the fight for justice is ongoing. Officer Hartman's name would occasionally pop up in the news. He had been indicted for filing false reports, and civil suits from other victims surfaced. Selena never took pleasure in his misfortune, but she felt a sense of closure that his actions finally had consequences. Justice, however flawed, had caught up to him. On a warm spring morning, Selena was informed that her new leadership role in intelligence was official. She stood at a small ceremony on base, receiving a symbolic pin recognizing her promotion. As she looked out at the small crowd, fellow airmen, commanding officers, and a beaming Aunt Rosalie, she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. This was not just a personal victory. It was a testament to resilience, to standing up for oneself, and to the idea that truth can prevail, even against the most entrenched prejudice. She gave a brief speech, expressing gratitude to her mentors and acknowledging the challenges she had faced both inside and outside the Air Force. When she mentioned her wrongful arrest, a respectful hush fell over the crowd. I stand here today not as a victim, she said, voice unwavering, but as a testament to what can happen when we refuse to let injustice define us. We are more than our worst experiences. We are our hopes, our dreams, and our determination to persevere. When the applause subsided, Selena placed a hand over her new pin. She looked up at the banner behind her, displaying the emblem of the United States Air Force. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of belonging, of returning to the core of who she was, a protector, an intelligence officer, and a survivor. She had overcome the humiliation Officer Hartman tried to force upon her. The memory of standing in that parking lot, battered pastries spilled at her feet, had transformed into a story of triumph and self-discovery. For Selena Jordan, the future shone bright. And for the community in Jacksonville, the story of the racist white cop who tried to humiliate a black woman in court, only to discover she was a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, served as a milestone in an ongoing conversation about policing, justice, and the need for change. In a world fraught with division, Selena's experience proved that even a single act of courage could ripple outward, challenging the status quo and inspiring a vision of a fairer, more accountable society.